Where on earth does one begin? I ask this question in the context of spiritual discovery. Where do we start? We struggle with how society at large views God and the wide variation of ideas about it from which we try to find something that feels true for us. None feels quite right. But what if we were to develop our own relationship with the source on our own terms and allowing for the existence of mystery? Sounds to me like it's something that's a lot easier said than done. Which brings us back to our first point. Where on earth does one begin? We light this chalice with love. We light it with a flame we have generated with our own hands through the ingenuity of the human spirit and mind. We light it with the intention to be more than we appear, more than we think we can become, and more than the world expects us to be. Today's message is more along Christian lines, looking at the Bible for value, using the predominant spiritual language of our culture for clues to a wider, more plural message. There's an oft-quoted idea in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. In fact, to these three sibling faiths, it's the number one goal: loving God. If we accomplish nothing else in our lives, we are expected to at least behave as if we love God. But what's the point of loving God? It sounds here like I'm suggesting it doesn't matter. Why bother? When I personally think it is of great importance to connect and enhance our connection to the oneness of all reality, also described as loving God. But if we are to do it, why? From my travels, I've learned that there's a particular trait about Americans that's not always true of other nationalities. It comes from the very reasons we founded this country in the first place. Taxation without representation is the same thing as don't ask questions, do as you're told, which does not fly with us very well. Americans insist on knowing why we are to do something. We need buy-in. If we're being commanded, we expect to know and be made to understand why we will choose to obey. We do not obey lightly, and nor should we. Christianity, Islam, and Judaism each teach us that God gave us free will. And if that's true, free will wasn't given so that we could defy it by following blindly. If we receive a command from someone or something, it is automatically suspect until there's an explanation. But the Bible, as well as other spiritual texts, rarely explain themselves when it comes to loving God or obeying commandments. We are expected to place our trust in the unknowable first and then bear the fruit of our efforts later. And that's the disconnect many of us feel when approaching what we understand to be our religious obligations. We can't conceptualize the notion that we have to cross the finish line first, run the race second, and third, train for it. It doesn't ring true for us, and for good reason. It doesn't make linear sense. And we like our lists. Step A, step B, step C. But the universe doesn't work that way. According to the texts, God is conceptual, not linear, which is part of the problem, even though it's already part of the solution as well. See, the difference between linear and conceptual is that linear is one after the other. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's linear. Conceptual, however, is all the numbers in a bowl together with no particular order or level of importance. They work as a cohesive soup. And there is a secret in that way of looking at it. For even though in linear fashion, numbers follow one after the other and in one sense represent quantity, which can be confused with quality, is a 5 really better than a 4? Or the other way around? No. They're only numbers, symbols of a greater idea, not values, not really. In some cultures, the number 4 represents order and structure, while 5 represents freedom and change. Which one is better? It depends upon whom you ask. The idea of God is more like a bowl of numbers, each intermingling with the others and can't be extracted from the whole. You can't take the chicken juice out of the broth, but you can taste it. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is that of the Good Samaritan. It's preceded by a brief conversation between Jesus and a scholar of Jewish law, the Torah. The scholar of the Torah asks Jesus what he needs to do to have eternal life. Jesus, in his typical humor, asks him back, "Well, you're the expert, you tell me." I can half picture Jesus sitting back with a smirk on his face. But the scholar knows the answer. He replies, "You shall love God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." Clue, 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 key. Love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus was like, bingo. And the scholar was like, okay, then tell me this. Who's my neighbor? And Jesus replied in typical fashion with a parable and told him a story. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and became surrounded by a group of robbers. And they stripped him and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. And by chance, a priest was going down on that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise, a Levite also, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan who was on a journey came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion and came to him and bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. And he put him on his own beast and brought him to an inn and took care of him. On the next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I'll return, I will repay you." And then Jesus turned to the scholar of Jewish law and said, "So, the priest, the Levite, and the Samaritan, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the robber's hands?" And the scholar said, "The one who showed mercy toward him." So Jesus said to him, "Go and do that." Because people say all the time, "Well, I love God," but it doesn't necessarily mean anything. Or at least, it's not the place to start. It may be where you end up, but if you want to plug into the mainframe, you have to begin by pressing enter. You have to start with the pathway you know about, the one that's accessible. It's each other. If we are actually made in God's image, as Scripture suggests, we have but to turn to one another to find the unity we seek. It's so much easier than we think, but it's the hardest thing we'll ever do. We can't see the forest through the trees because Spirit walks among us in the face of each person we meet. You want to love God? Start by loving its creation. It's no different than an artist. If you want to get to know an artist and truly appreciate the artist's genius and creativity, start by looking at and appreciating their work. Having an appreciation for it is what opens the door. Gratitude. Don't just love your neighbor, be grateful for them. Because a neighbor you love keeps you much safer than a neighbor you hate. Which neighbor will keep an eye on your house when you go away on vacation? It certainly isn't the one whose newspaper you're stealing. It's the one you have coffee with. I'm grateful to have good neighbors, and I'm honored to be one myself. I heard someone say once, to know God is to love God. Oh, really? Well, how can we possibly know God? That's a concept which can't be seen or explained. God is a concept like love. We can feel it without touching it. We can know it without being able to prove it. Can you define love? Can you prove love? Can you explain love to someone else? You can try. We believe in love, though, but we can't prove to another person that love exists. They'd have to know it for themselves. If they're having trouble, they can start by looking at and appreciating all of the places where love already exists. We acknowledge love's existence as being real, yet we know no more about love than we know about God. And what if they're the same thing? What if we're dancing and hedging around the existence of God because we don't realize it's right in front of our faces every day? People have humanized God to the point that we don't believe in it at all. But when we love a kitten, we are loving God. When we close our eyes and turn our faces toward the warm sunlight and sigh with relief, we are loving God. When we like something on Facebook, we're loving God. We're loving the interconnected oneness of all things. When we illustrate approval or appreciation for anything loving and beautiful in the world, we are loving God. When you teach yourself to be grateful, every time you see something amazing, you are programming yourself to recognize and love a presence and energy we have chosen to call God. One of the things Jesus does in the New Testament is tell us what is no longer relevant from the old one. You've heard it said, eye for an eye, but I tell you, turn the other cheek. Jesus also tells us which of the old laws are still correct, as in the case of that Good Samaritan. Jesus tells us that the old Jewish law is still correct. We are expected to love our neighbor as ourselves. But how do we feel about ourselves? If we feel unworthy, how does that help us to love ourselves? And if the amount we are able to love ourselves is the same as we give our neighbor, as well as God, what does that say about how much love we give in the world? If we are truly as unworthy as some religions claim, how much worth can our love for the interconnected web of all existence or one another truly be? Don't listen to the prayers or teachings that say you are unworthy. You are worthy. You are worthy. You are a piece of the universe. How can anything ever be unworthy? I'm going to give you a visual here. If God came down and made you a chocolate cake, what would you do with it? How would you feel about it? Would you eat it or think you're not worthy of eating it? Would you deny God the right to see you enjoy the cake that it made for you? Or would you make God watch you encrust the cake with jewels and gold and carry it around like a sacred object? Eventually the cake will rot away, leaving only the scaffolding of jewels to remind us it once existed, but that we missed our opportunity to take joy and nourishment from it. Eat the cake, and you'll understand what there is to love about God. The existence of chocolate at all is reason enough to believe in the existence of God. Ben Franklin, on the other hand, felt that beer was enough to prove the existence of God. There's no one right way. In the absence of the skill of loving oneself, how do we achieve love at all? This is where the conceptual nature of God comes in best. Our neighbor is the key. The face of God exists in the face of our neighbor. It's the meaning of the word namaste. The God in me sees and honors the God in you. It's the secret pathway to being able to love everything else. If you can't love yourself, try it with someone else. Someone else that hasn't screwed everything up as far as you know. Loving a stranger is easier because they haven't made any mistakes against you, really. Start with loving something easy, maybe like a puppy or a flower. And when you do, even more, perhaps less obvious reasons for why they should be loved start to show themselves more clearly. Your love for them develops further. And once you plug in to the paradigm of love in that way, gratitude is the natural result. How can one not feel grateful for the existence of something that makes you so happy? And once you feel that, it becomes a snowball of ability to love other things and see the light that they bring into the world, even when they also challenge us. And then it becomes easier to love the things that challenge us, because they too have a gift to bear. Eventually, we start to find that we are able to be grateful for even the challenges because we've opened ourselves to the possibility that much of what has the ability to harm us also has the ability to save us. And then loving yourself doesn't seem like such a challenge at all, see? The phrase loving God is the terminology we use to describe a feeling of respect, awe, amazement, and wonder at the mystery and complexity of our living existence and all the life which surrounds us on this mathematical unlikelihood we call Earth. If you think life is an amazing thing with enormous potential, then you're already, quote unquote, loving God, at least in the way that idea is truly meant. You don't have to believe in a higher power to love God. There's no linear order to the experience of love for the great central source or its creation. Even a belief that all of this formed on its own from nothingness without love involved in its creation is worthy of our wonder. That we are thinking about it, to me, is even more inspiring. The experience of having reverence for all existence is conceptual. You can take any number from the bowl and start right there. Be at ease now and breathe. Close your eyes if you will. As you continue to inhale and exhale, feel the breath working its way more deeply into the fibers of your muscle and bone. Feel the back of your head tingle and your hands and feet as you continue to inhale and exhale. Consider for these few moments the unfolding process of peace. World peace is inevitable in time, but we fear what we shall have to endure to arrive at it. We fear that it will not be in our lifetimes. Our fears are justified. We will not likely ever know the shade of the trees we plant today. But peace unfolds nonetheless, steadily working its love into our processes, laws, compassion, and even our politics. It shall not lose. Think of the unfolding of peace in the same way that one might gently unfold an origami peace crane. Its folds are deeply ingrained in the structure of its existence. It does not understand what it might be like to be open. The paper does not know what it represents now that it has been folded into this shape. It does not know that it is an expression of the one who folded it. In trying to unfold a delicate origami structure, we must be careful. We must be gentle and patient, firm but kind, understanding of the delicate nature of each folded line and the potential each fold has to become torn in the process of its unfolding. Be gentle, be patient, and yet know with confidence that peace is unfolding all around us, step by step, fold by fold, opening and unfurling into its grandest state yet known. Its future is assured. Peace is inevitable. Take heart, and with one final cleansing breath, open your eyes and return.
Amen.